Welcome to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Schmidt, off-road endurance athlete and mental health mentor. If you're really serious about getting that next PB, you can't overlook taking care of your mental health. Because although mental health and sport performance might seem completely unrelated, when you look at how your body actually works, you'll find out that they're two sides of the same coin, which means prioritizing your mental health will boost your sport performance. I'll dive deep into the scientific connections between mental health and sport performance and give you practical strategies that will get you to the root of your depression and anxiety so that you can feel your best and perform even better. Hey team, and welcome back to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast. Or if this is the first time you're tuning in, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. We've got a really interesting conversation coming up today. I am chatting with Elyssa Selte, and she is a forest therapy practitioner. So I actually met Elyssa while I was attending and teaching at a conference here in Alberta, and she did a fantastic presentation talking about all things about the benefits of nature and all of the ways that we can engage with it and such. And I knew as soon as I listened to her that you guys would love this. I know that there's a lot of trail runners out there. I know that there's a lot of people when you're not doing road training, you might be out hiking or you just love going for a walk in the park or whatever that looks like for you. But nature is something for mental health that we all know is beneficial, but I don't think we necessarily understand or know at the full depth of why it's so beneficial. And Elyssa is definitely an expert in that area. So I've brought her on today to chat about all of that. So I'm really excited to have you here, Elyssa. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So just give us a little bit about you. Tell us about who you are and how you came into the forest therapy world.
For sure. So I'm Alyssa. I'm a forest therapy guide and a recreation therapist based in Eastern Alberta. I've always been passionate about nature and helping people connect with nature. When I'm not working, I enjoy listening to music. My fiance is a musician, so we do lots of traveling. And I'm a chronic hobbyist. I enjoy trying new things. So I'm usually like trying something new in my free time. And then I've created a platform called Come Hug a Tree with hopes to share a little bit about recreation therapy and forest therapy and its benefits on well being. So that's a little bit about me. And then how I got into forest therapy. When I was doing my education in recreation therapy at Norquest, we were doing a class, and I wish I could remember what the class was called because it might provide some insight, but obviously I wasn't super intrigued until this specific lecture when we had a guest speaker come in and talk about forest therapy as sort of like a means to connect recreation therapy to nature. And I was immediately intrigued. So I went home and I phoned my mom and dad and I'm like, hey, I need a loan. So I signed up for the cohort that was coming up in the next like 2 weeks. And I really didn't know a lot about like what forest therapy actually entailed. But I knew that it was something that I was interested in. I've always been somebody who's found a lot of peace in nature. And so I'm a firm believer in no education is ever wasted, so I knew it wasn't gonna be a waste of time, but I could sort of like at that time see the connection between forest therapy and recreation therapy. And worst case scenario, I was just gonna enjoy it, even if it didn't connect to kind of what my education was. So I signed up for the upcoming cohort through the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, and that's how I got into doing my training.
That's awesome. It's so funny how like there's like I don't know what you want to call them. It's like not a light bulb moment, but a moment in time where it's just like something like enters your space and it's like this is meant to be here. Like that whole course was just like wah, wah, and then all of a sudden it was like that one moment kind of changed your life really, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and like amazing to just have that moment and just be able to like sign up and go. Like what an intuitive moment where you can just run with it. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I remember my mom being like, "Do we like, are we sure we should do this? Like, are we sure we should be doing this so soon? Like, I don't know, maybe you need to take some extra time to like look into this." Because yeah, the Association of Nature and Forestry trains tons of guides, and so they set it up in cohorts, and I think it's like I'm not sure how frequently they start, but I don't like, you have to put in an application and whatnot, and I remember being approved quite quickly, so it was like, if I wanted to start soon, I could start soon kinda thing, and my mom was like, "Are we sure? Like, maybe we should take some time to think this through and, you know, weigh our options here," but yeah, it definitely was, like, something that it wasn't even a question for me for sure.
Yeah. I know it's funny. I'm one of those people too, like even you said you have like lots of hobbies and always are like trying out new things and stuff. And like being a person that has that kind of personality, it's funny because other people are very hesitant when you're like, "Let's go." Oh man.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm glad that you trusted your gut because it feels like just how you talk about it and the spark that you have when you share more. Um it just shows that you're really meant to be there. Like recreation therapy, it's such a bounce off for like for people that don't know. I'm a recreation therapist as well, but it's essentially just using anything that a person enjoys that's not work to as therapy. And it's really creative in the sense that you can just like take something and that somebody cares about and really turn it into something that's actually going to help them in some way, shape, or form. So we get to be creative instead of just like being like a physical therapist. It's like, move your arm or your leg in this way to rehab. It's like, oh, you like doing this thing. Now, how can I tweak that to fit you? Which is really cool. And I think forest therapy is just such a natural branch off of that. And it's super cool to be able to have that extra education. So like tell us a little bit more of like what is the forest therapy and like what do you do as a forest therapy guide?
Yeah. So just a little bit of background, because I feel like this sort of gives some insight into where it even came from. I feel like often people are quick to be like, what, like, why would we need something like this? Like, I know how to go out into nature, or, my job, I spend lots of time outside, or I go on walks frequently. So what's the difference kind of thing? So, in the 80s in Japan, forest therapy originated as a practice in Japan. So, in the 80s, they were experiencing this cultural shift where people were moving from their homes out in the country to these bigger city centers. They were starting like corporate indoor jobs. And with this shift, they noticed a huge change in people's health. So, they noticed like an increase in cancer, an increase in just like general cold and flu symptoms. We were talking about that. This happens to everybody, but they noticed this when people were spending more time indoors. And so the government wanted obviously their people to be okay. And so they did some research into what they can be doing to help people get back outside. And so the Japanese government funneled a ton of money into researching the benefits of nature in hopes to like sort of encourage people to get back outside. And lo and behold, they found that nature is really great for our physical and mental health. So they just continued to like funnel research, and they still do. The Japanese government, I've never been to Japan, but I would really love to go. But they put a lot of time and effort into creating green spaces within their cities and encouraging lots of trails in the country for people to walk in and utilize. And so they've really made it accessible for people to use with the hopes of people getting back out into nature. And so that's kind of where it came from. The Japanese Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Forestries, I think, coined a term called Shinrin Yoku, which translates in English to forest bathing. And when they were doing their research, they found that trees emit a chemical called phytoncides, which is basically the tree's immune system. It helps fight against fungus, disease, pests, all of those things. And they found out that when humans are exposed to the phytoncides, we experience a number of physical health benefits. And so when we're out in nature, we're essentially bathing in the phytoncides. So that's where the term Shinrin Yoku came from. And then thus forest therapy was sort of born. So it's basically a practice that encourages people to immerse themselves in the natural world really mindfully and intentionally. It's not about like exercising or reaching a certain destination. It's not really kind of like a hike with the intention of you're starting at A and trying to get to B, but it's more about like slowing down and connecting with the different senses that you experience when you're in nature. So it's guided by sort of the principles of mindfulness and sensory awareness, and it promotes relaxation, reducing stress, fosters connection with the environment. And again, yeah, it's rooted in those Japanese traditions of encouraging connection with nature and a little bit of modern research in order to improve our overall well-being in connection with nature.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's so interesting. I guess the first thing that comes to my head when you tell it like the background with the Japanese government, I'm like, man, like what's up with our governments? We're all
Exactly.
inside way too much and nobody's putting money into this. I mean, maybe they are and I'm just not aware of it, but
I agree.
um but it's amazing that they notice trends, and I think these trends are present like not even just from people moving into cities, but just being like we are just inside more often. And I know like a lot of listeners here are very connected to nature, but in a kind of a different capacity. I think we all go out there with that intention of going from point A or point B or having a purpose. And it sounds to me like when you go out, like I guess the difference between like a forest therapy kind of session and versus just like going for a walk in the woods kind of a deal is that you actually like there is no purpose. You're just going. Yeah. It's a unique thing. I think as as an endurance athlete myself and like especially like trail running and mountain biking, like part of the reason I love doing it so much is because I do get to be out in nature and experience like the quiet and the like the scenery and all that kind of stuff. But is somebody still going to get benefits if they're just like cruising through at like well, I'm not top speed, but you know what I mean? Cruising through
Yeah.
at speed versus just like actually like intentionally engaging.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, I know you specifically work with endurance athletes, which is amazing. But just know that it's not only it's everybody really struggles to slow down. I think it's just kind of the world that we live in that we're sort of conditioned to get everything done quickly, and if we're not doing something, we should be doing something, and there's always something to do. So, um, you can definitely get the benefits from just being in nature. Um, some of the benefits specifically are like the biggest one to me is that it lowers your cortisol levels, so
Mhm.
which is our stress hormone. So being surrounded by greenery in itself, in any capacity, being in nature and fresh air, puts your body basically into like a state of calm. So even just being in nature, you can already tell. I'm sure that's something that you experience when you're outside. You just feel better. It boosts your mood, reduces your symptoms of feelings of anxiety and depression. I know, it feels for me anyways easier to go for a walk outside than it would be to walk on a treadmill, you know?
Mhm.
Like those kind of things, you kind of experience those in your day-to-day life. So yeah, I think you can definitely experience the benefits from just being out in nature in general in any capacity that sort of works in your everyday life, which is why I feel like I'm going to change the topic a little bit, but I think that's why sometimes people struggle with the idea of a guide at times. Like, why do we need a guide when, I know how to get out in nature or I'm already doing this every day? You really don't.
Mhm.
I I feel like my role as a guide is really important, but if that's something that's working for you in that time, I think, yeah, if you're experiencing the benefits of being in nature, then that's great.
Yeah, that's the whole point. But at the same time, like what so you go out with a guide, like what's going to be the difference between when you go out and just like do your own thing versus having somebody to actually like work with you through that experience?
Yeah. So a guide provides sort of like a structure. So we suggest exercises that will sort of prompt your sensory awareness and encourage reflection while you're in nature. So this can be helpful for people who find it difficult to like switch off sort of or fully engage with nature on their own. Um, so currently as a recreation therapist, I work in long-term care. And this would be a situation where it might be easier to have a guide or somebody sort of cueing those certain exercises, I guess, for lack of a better word. In forest therapy, we call them invitations, which people also really struggle with. And I'm somebody who is like a rule follower. I enjoy structure, and so the term invitations is can be really hard to understand. Like, why is it called an invitation and not a task? The reason why it's called an invitation is that you're invited to complete it, but there's no pressure. You're not ever going to do it right or wrong, which I think is really cool. I struggled with it a lot at first, I'll admit, but I think it's really cool because if you're not connecting with that specific sense that day or even that prompt, you can still experience the benefits of nature in a different way. And so I'll try and give an example. Like, as a guide, we would provide invitations throughout the session, which is usually like it depends on the group, but it could be up to 3 hours, and so each invitation will last a certain amount of time. It's sort of like an independent, like, activity, for lack of a better word, but you kind of go off and interpret the invitation however you might. So say the invitation was something to do with exploring your sense of smell. Um, Here's a really easy example. What if somebody had, like, a kind of dulled sense of smell? They weren't able to experience that sense as strongly as other people would. They might not connect with that invitation as easier or as easy as I would. And so they're not doing it wrong because they can't like they don't have a sense of smell, but they might connect with a different sense a little bit easier. And so that's why it's called an invitation. So a guide sort of provides that structure with invitations and sort of cues you to engage certain senses, which can be really helpful for folks who might have a harder time doing that on their own, if that makes
Nice.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So, like, in a session then when you're out, like you said, like, up to 3 hours or whatever, like, how many invitations would you, like, prompt people with while you're out there? Or does it kinda just depend on the group or
It sort of depends, and it depends on what the forest is giving you in that day too, which sounds really kind of crazy. Like, I feel like often I say things and people are, like, raising their eyebrows at me, but it really, like, I don't know, the forest will know what you want, which is really interesting, or it will know what you need, not necessarily what you want, but it kind of depends. Like, during my training, they provide, um, the sort of, like, classic structure of what a forest therapy walk will look like, so it always starts with, the hospitality, sort of like a little bit of an overview about the walk, a little bit of an introduction, just because usually it's done in groups or in a one-to-one setting, sort of the introduction part, and then we do a land acknowledgement, and then it jumps right into, pleasures of presence invitation, which is a very, um like, this should happen or will happen in most forest therapy walks if you're guided by a guide who's been trained by the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. So this is a it sort of, like, settles you into the space. Um, and another thing that they have that I think is really cool is they taught us about the thresholds. So you'll enter the threshold and then you'll exit that threshold in the walk. So pleasures of presence is when you'll enter the threshold. So that's basically like imagine like stepping into a bubble. So you'll walk into the bubble, you're in that bubble for the duration of the walk. You're completely disconnected from anything that might be happening in your life, your phone, all of that stuff, and then at the end of the walk, you'll exit the bubble again, which I think is a really cool way of thinking about it. It can be really hard for us to like disconnect from everything that's going on. So that one, the pleasures of presence invitation is something that will happen in most walks, and then it's usually like 3 or 4 invitations that the guide comes up with based on what the forest is offering that day, and then we do like a tea ceremony at the end. So
Oh,
it's
that's
yeah, it kind of differs depending on the guide and depending on the group and the time frame that you have and the weather and all of that stuff, but yeah, that's like the standard sequence.
that's really cool, and it's nice. I love the idea of the bubble because, especially in sport, like, there's a lot about, like, learning how to set your mindset and just, like, kinda almost like flipping a switch between, like, being in your life and then turning the switch so that you can actually, like, focus and, be present in the training session instead of thinking about a million and one things. Um, it's like something that I actually work with teams quite often on is like we call them containment strategies, where it's like, especially in a team, like it's easy to do that kind of on your own, but when we're working with a team, like in a team sport, where you have to like be able to, as a group, like shut off all the garbage from outside and just like come together. So I think that's like super cool because it really does help you get so much more out of the experience when you can create that bubble, and like just having that visual can be really helpful. So for anybody who's listening, even if it's not forced therapy, put yourself in a bubble before your training session because it definitely helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I played hockey growing up, all the years that I was in school, and so that was also something that I experienced too, was, like, you kind of just are taught, especially, like, even with the idea of, like, like, we always had the rule of, like, no phones in the dressing room, so even that sort of, like, just little thing helps you to disconnect, and I know one thing that it was sort of like, again, an invitation, very optional, but in our training, some of the guides that I worked with would do like a physical threshold, so they would, like, lay a stick down and you would step over the stick and then you were in the bubble, and I thought that that was a really cool visualization too for, like, people who might have a harder time, kind of, like, recognizing that, to have, like, a physical object that you're stepping over, and then when you're done, you're stepping back over it might be a I don't know, it's something to consider anyways if that's something that works for you.
And I think that's actually a good point to add because I think a lot of people assume that everybody has like this ability to like visualize or like see like a movie, and not everybody can, or other people like so everybody has a very different way that they visualize. Like for me personally, like I think a lot of people get this idea of like a movie, like they can really like see everything happening. And I get like really weird flashes of like I'm gonna say, like, features. I don't know how to explain it, but, like, for example, if I was doing, like, a I don't know, like, a visualization on, like, in sport, we do a lot about, like, crossing the finish line or, like, being at a specific place in a race and, like, all like, this type of thing, or, like, a really specific maneuver or whatever. I can't actually see myself, for example, like, riding up a steep section or coming down a steep section and, like, mastering it, but I can see, like, a flash of a route and like a glimmer of like the light reflecting off my bike. Like it's really weird. I don't get the whole
Yeah.
scene. So everybody's completely different. So having a physical piece can be really helpful, whether it's like actually moving your body, like yeah, you step over the stick or you step over like stepping through the door is another really good example. Um but it can also be like getting out of the car and shutting the door or something like that, right? Like there's all kinds of physical things, but it's like having that habit of actually doing it every single time can be really helpful. And it just creates like, it trains your brain literally to have like a mental transition. So I feel like if you did it in forest therapy, whether you're like with a guide or on your own, just like going into engage in nature, if you always had that thing that just like switches you into that like decompress, that'd be super cool and really make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So we kind of like touched on it a little bit, but let's circle back to some of those mental health benefits for being out in nature and actually like immersing yourself completely. One of the things that you mentioned that we talk about quite a bit on this podcast and just in my space in general was the cortisol piece. So for endurance athletes especially because our training sessions are so long, not all of them, but like we just put so many hours on feet. It's stressful on the body, but also we have all of the other stressors in our lives. Cortisol is like super high. And so we're always looking for ways to regulate or manage that. So tell us a little bit about more about how like how or I guess what's happening in the body when you're actually in nature in relation to cortisol.
Yeah. So, like I said, spending time in nature obviously lowers your cortisol. It's our stress hormone. So, being surrounded by greenery and hearing the sound of even just like flowing water or wind puts your body into a state of calm. So, this is usually called like the restorative effect of nature. It's just the act of being in nature is just like lowering your cortisol levels. It lowers your blood pressure. Again, that's sort of like one of the benefits of, being exposed to phytoncides if you're in, like, around trees, for whatever it has positive effects on our own hormones and, yeah, our own stress levels as well. So it's really helpful to the trees to have that sort of immunity, but it's also helpful to humans. So it's mostly the, phytoncides that actually reduce our cortisol levels and lower our blood pressure, but, um I believe that, um, I believe in evolution. So regardless of what people believe, I believe that humans um, were meant to be exposed to nature, and we've kind of moved away from that just the way that our culture is. And so I think that one of the reasons why, um, we feel so many benefits from being in nature is that it's just the way that our bodies are meant to be is exposed to nature, and we've kind of moved away from that. So that's one of the biggest, health benefits that we experience from being in nature. And then, yeah, it encourages us, being in nature to be connected to a natural setting and engages our senses and fosters mindfulness. And so that in turn boosts our mood. It reduces symptoms of anxiety and depression. So it just has, like, overall good benefits. It makes us feel good to be outside, and I feel like that's something that is pretty common. I think a lot of people experience that, and no judgment if you don't, but, I think a lot of people can kind of connect with that feeling of relaxation when they're in nature.
Mhm.
Another really cool thing that is found to happen when you're in nature is it can improve your concentration and your creativity, so it replenishes our cognitive resources and allows us to, like, think more clearly, to solve problems more effectively. So, yeah, and in turn, just improves our concentration.
That's real for sure. Like, I think I get all of my ideas when I'm out either running or biking on the trails. Like, I mean, sometimes in the pool too, but it's like the creativity just starts to spin, even if it's like I was at home and just like hitting a wall with whatever I was working on. It definitely makes a difference. And I think it's so important for us to know that, like, especially for training too, like it takes a tremendous amount of focus to be able to stay present and mindful through an entire workout or an entire race. Like it's hours of time. And of course it's not perfect, right? We're always gonna have like we're gonna bounce around a little bit and then come back. But the most effective athletes are the ones that actually can stay focused because then you're gonna reduce mistakes and all this kind of stuff. So being able to actually like practice something like forest therapy is kind of like I'm gonna say like a funner version of mindfulness because I love mindfulness and I totally appreciate the benefits, but it can be kind of boring sometimes.
Yes, yeah.
It's much funner when you're out in nature somewhere and actually get to look at cool stuff instead of just like looking around your house or your office or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I find, just from my experience, I really struggle with, like, the sort of meditation part because I cannot stop my mind from wandering. I am, like, always, like, I'm looking at the dust on the back of my TV or something, like, thinking about something else completely unrelated. So, being out in nature, you're totally right. It gives you a different, like, kind of perspective on things, and it's easier to not let your mind wander if you're focused on what's in front of you.
Yeah, and if do you have any like I guess like a strategy like if somebody was going to go and just be like, "Okay, I'm going to go out for like an intentional exposure in nature." Like what kinds of things can they like be looking at or focusing on? Like what can they use as a mindfulness tool, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing is focusing on your senses, which is definitely easier said than done. But um, I think one of the things that I've found to be helpful for me when I'm in nature is to kind of go through them. So spend a certain amount of time for each sense, go through them. I always say, like, be cautious with your sense of taste, but each to each their own. But I feel like if you allot a certain amount of time to focus on a specific sense, you'll notice some really interesting things. And sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. Like you can focus on your sense of sound and hear something, but um, it might be like a really quiet day for some reason. So then you're maybe thinking about what's the closest sound to you and what's the furthest sound that you can hear and sort of like getting creative with the different ways that you can play with that prompt. Um, Sometimes slowing down can feel really counterintuitive, but the small things really help. So being short and intentional with your moments, even things like sitting under a tree for 5 minutes, watching the clouds, drinking your like morning coffee outside, which is tricky when we live in Canada. There's not there's not a lot of time that's like comfortable,
Mhm.
but incorporating those little things to be really like short intentional moments can be really helpful. And then another thing is always just circling back to your breathing, which again, easier said than done, but it is really helpful in like kind of settling things down and bringing yourself back to where you are.
Mhm. Yeah, and I find like since I was listening to your presentation like a month or so ago, like I've noticed more like like I like looking at stuff, I guess. So noticed I've been looking at bark a lot. Like take a second, guys, and have a look at some bark. It's wild. Like I will admit I haven't like necessarily like slowed down a lot to like inspect a tree, for example, and like really get into it. But like as I'm walking, I'm like, whoa, like there's like a huge hole in this tree's bark, or there's just like weird ridges or different things. So it's like just starting to notice that stuff is really about what mindfulness is just like being present in whatever moment it is. So depending on, yeah, like get those senses tuned. And I think the other piece of that too is like tap into the senses that you don't normally tap into. Like I think a lot of us just really rely on our eyes, but there's so many things to hear. It's crazy.
Yep,
Take your headphones
absolutely.
out. Let's go. Like, let's listen.
Yes, I love that you said, "What are you noticing?" too, because that's another big thing that's just, like, repeated throughout our training, and it's, again, sort of tying back into that invitation part of it's a very open-ended, prompt, and you'd have saw this in my presentation when so, for those of you who weren't there, I had a little picnic basket filled with, like, little items from nature, and we passed around the room, everybody chose an item, and then we sat with it for, I think it was 2 minutes or something, and the prompt after that was, "What are you noticing?" And so, obviously, a lot of people were noticing something about the specific object, but which is great, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the intention behind that prompt is that you really could be noticing anything. They could have been noticing that in the next room over, another presentation was happening, and they were hearing that sound through the wall, or they were noticing something out the window behind me. So, using that, prompt or circling back to that prompt when you're in nature of what are you noticing can be really helpful with grounding too. It's not even yeah, like, there's so many options and so many different things that you are noticing every second of the day that we just don't often take the time to sit and stop and think about that. So keeping that prompt in mind of what are you noticing when you're out in nature can be a really cool way to kind of bring things back to. And I know you talked about how, you don't often take the time to, like, stop and inspect a tree, which is so true. But I think and you'll probably relate to this as a rec therapist, but I think a big part of recreation therapy is sort of coming back to the things that you enjoyed doing as a kid. We're tying in that aspect of play, which can be really tricky for some people. But when we think about what we did as a kid, or if our mom would send us outside, like my mom, when we were kids, my mom would watch Days of Our Lives, so she would send us outside when she was watching Days of Our Lives. So, like, what did me and my siblings do as a kid? We, like, built a fort, or we would, like, collect things and make, like, whatever. So, taking a moment to, like, be a kid for a little bit and stop and look at the tree or dig around a little bit and see what you find can be a really cool way to incorporate nature too and, yeah, really slow down with it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point about like the play piece because I could do it. Well, probably the two of us could do it. A whole other chat on play episode on that. But like, I think a lot of times we get a little bit mistaken that in order to play, that we have to like be immature. I think it's like the word I'm looking for. So like, it's like has to be like silly or like there's just like weird noises. Like, you know what I mean? Like kids are out there like just they're just being weird. And
Mhm.
it's like play doesn't have to be like that. Like play can be um like the other day I was doing a I was actually it's funny, I was looking for like kind of like more of like a guided walking thing through the forest and I found a completely different guided walking meditation which was really great, but it was like encouraging play and I just like scooped up a pile of snow in my hands and just like threw it up in the air and watched as the snow like glistened as it came down. It's like there's nothing silly about that, but it felt playful and fun for me and I also was able to like really engage in senses in that moment too of just like seeing all the snow falling around and just having a little bit of fun. So it's like it doesn't have to be like we're gonna play, but we're gonna be serious about it, you know? You don't have to
Yeah.
it can be, but it also doesn't have to go to like the extreme side of being totally goofy and silly either. So just like connecting to nature in itself is a form of play. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Especially like collecting things. I think
Yep.
that's like how like I don't know what kid didn't collect something like rocks, sticks, leaves, like I played with frogs. I don't know.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure my fiancé sometimes is like, "Oh, this lady, why did I get myself into this?" Because we decorated our Christmas tree not that long ago, and I was, like, out there was no snow on the ground when I put my Christmas tree out. I was collecting pine cones and, like, hot gluing, like, a string to them to hang them on the tree, and I'm like, "Do I need to do this? No." But it was fun. I don't know, there's, like, oranges hanging in the wall behind me. I'm very much like that. I enjoy collecting things, which is, like, I don't know, probably at the time I didn't think about it, but you are actively slowing down and connecting with nature if you notice something on the ground and you're like, "Oh, I wanna pick that up right now," which I
Mhm.
think is a really cool way of going about things, I think, um, again, we're, like, almost conditioned to not do that, but that's, like, one of the cool parts about, um, forest therapy walks or even just, like, spending time in nature is, like, your body feels like doing something, do it. Like, you see that cool rock on the ground, pick it up. If you feel like taking your shoes off and walking in that grass, take them off. Like, and sometimes we forget that we're allowed to do that stuff. It feels like we aren't, but you totally are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard because I think for me and for a lot of the listeners, like we're like I talked about earlier, like we're out in it, but we're like in a structured workout. So even something like stopping to take a picture is like, I mean, some athletes do it. I don't. I like very rarely, depending on the workout, but it's just like even something like that feels like I'm like compromising my training in some way. So it's like you're out there, but you're not actually really that engaged. So it's like it's a really big difference between, I think, going out and running or biking or whatever, and then actually like going out and being engaged. And like even if it's a short period of time, like or like you're out walking the dog in the morning and instead of just being like half asleep and like cruising through, like take a second and look at a tree or pick up a pine cone or actually look at the trail that you're walking on instead of just like absentmindedly like cruising through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to slow down. This is like the theme that keeps coming up, but it is hard.
Yes. It is very hard, and it's hard to intentionally set aside that time to slow down, but I think that that's one of the cool parts about it, and you talk about habits all the time, which is amazing, and I think that this is just another habit that you can once you kind of get into the groove of it, it's really easy to incorporate it in, and, it still is hard because as a forest therapy guide, there's times where I'm like now, absolutely, I'm not spending any more time outside than I need to. Like, it is
Mhm.
too cold, not loving it, but it is one of those things that if you sort of, like, add it into your daily routine, it makes it feel a little bit easier to be involved in that.
So I guess kind of on that note, is it like sometimes it is challenging to get outside, whether it's a weather thing or whether your schedule is just like crammed and you can't fit it in or whatever that looks like. Um, is there any benefit to having like nature sounds or like even just like looking out a window at greenery? Like, I mean, obviously you're not going to get those like get the same chemical interaction, but like, is there anything that is that going to help at all?
I think so. I think, I haven't looked a lot into the science of it, but I 100% believe that is the truth. I have a lot of plants in my house, so that has been, um, a way that in my own life that I've incorporated nature into, because 'cause I'm definitely not a winter girly, I really struggle to be outside in the winter. So that's, like, a way that I've kind of connected with nature in those colder months, and it also is just, like, that intentional task, like, I set aside a certain amount of time, whatever, every week or whatever, to water and, like, deadhead my plants, and so then that's, like, my time to just do that by myself, it's my own activity, I'm connecting with nature in, like, some capacity. So I think that there is, tons of benefits to incorporating those, like, maybe not as traditional ways of incorporating nature into your everyday life. Even things like, um, there's so many nature sounds on, like, Spotify and Apple Music, and sometimes I know for myself, I just, like I'm not connecting with music in that moment, like, there's no songs that I wanna listen to, or, like, I feel like I've listened to, like, the same song over and over again, and so switching it up to a nature sound can be really helpful. I know, when I'm alone, like, home alone, I usually put on nature sounds before I go to sleep, and that even just I find, like, I get a little bit of anxiety when I'm home alone, we're out in the country in the middle of nowhere, so it's like that helps calm me a little bit, so I think that there's tons of benefits to, like, using those kind of non-traditional techniques, especially as Canadians when there's, like, a huge gap in the year where it is a little bit harder to be outside, to incorporate nature inside.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. I love the like the plants and stuff because like it doesn't just have to be out in the forest. So like put plants in your office, put plants in your living spaces and like actually intentionally engage with them. Like I always laugh because I think it was like one of my therapy assistants. But anyways, we had this like professor in university who obviously improved significantly between when this person taught them and when I had them. But one of the tasks that she was assigned was that every single day they had to choose a tree, like a single tree, and every day for the semester they had to go out and observe the tree. Which, like, I'm just laughing because, like, university students would just be like, "Oh my god." But, like, it was I don't know, you start to notice stuff. Like, I do that sometimes with, like, certain plants in my place, like, actually, like, this, pothos plant that's behind me if you're watching the video. Um, it's not even mine, I'm taking care of it for a friend, but it's growing so much, and, like, every day I notice that there's, like, something has changed about the leaf. There's, like, usually 1 or 2 leaves at a time that are starting to come out, and it's like every day you get to notice a difference if you actually pay attention to it, which is really cool.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Yeah, on the topic of plants, I have actually a blog post on using plants indoors because I think that there is something really special about indoor plants, and the biggest thing being there's literally 0 pressure with them. Like, I know that you have to pay for them, but if they die, it's a plant, it's okay, and so I think that that's really, like, kind of cool because sometimes I buy a plant because I think it looks great, and then it just, like, immediately dies. I know my grandma not that long ago gave me an ivy, and she was like, "Here you go, I got this for you," and I'm like, "Oh, I've never had any luck," and I brought it home and it died immediately, and it sucks, but it's just a plant, it's really okay. So I think that that's really cool is, like, you have it at your disposal, basically, you have it to connect with, but there's really, like, no pressure with it, and there's also really cool ways that you can, like, kind of force yourself to notice those things too, like, I've seen, TikTok on a TikTok, people have put, like, the little pony beads onto their pothos plants.
oh,
So,
cool.
when you're, like, before the leaf has unraveled, you put the bead on it, and so then it sort of tracks how much it's grown in a certain amount of time. You can see like, "Oh, I put that bead, that purple bead on at this date or whatever, and it's grown this much since then." So that's kind of a cool way to, like, remember and, like, force yourself to notice how much has my plant grown since I put that bead on. So there is, like, some really neat ways to be creative with those things too.
Mhm. Oh, I love that idea. I wish I'd seen that because I was literally like, I was laying in bed thinking about this literally last night. I being like, I wish that I had taken a picture of this when I brought this to this house because it was like kind of, it wasn't dying, but it wasn't thriving by any means. And now it's thriving and it's grown so much. And I like wish that I remember where it was when it first got here only like a couple months ago. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's a really cool idea. Just tap in, guys. I don't know, decorate things. I have a jade plant too, and it's like you could just like hang little things on it.
exactly,
My jade
exactly.
Christmas tree.
Yes, yeah, there's some yeah, if you just take a moment and be creative and yeah, and again with that play part, it feels silly. Like when I first when you first like hear about the bead thing, you're probably like, really? Like, do we need to do that? But I don't know. What do you have to lose? Like, why not?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And like it doesn't have to be this like 30-minute engagement thing. Like when you water your plants, have a good look at them or like feel them or smell them or whatever, like maybe not again not taste them depending on what it is, but maybe you grow herbs in your house, I don't know, like, and you can engage with them that way. So just think about it, different ways to get stuff engaged at home. Growing herbs, that's I don't know, that didn't come to my head until just now, and that would be really great.
Yes, definitely.
Mhm. Awesome. I will also link to that blog post that you wrote as well in the show notes. So for anybody that wants to go in and read that, go ahead and do that. It's down below. Um, I'm coming back to the slowing down piece one more time, but like, do you have any tips for people that are really struggling to actually like take the speed down and engage and not just be like the good old type A personality of like, I have a task, I'm going to do it. Like, how do you just like start to let that go and baby step into this kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is setting aside time, especially for those people who have a hard time with like kind of the task completion part. I am a person like that. I am like a checklist person to my
Mm.
core. And so even just putting something like that on a checklist or setting aside this specific amount of time to complete that task can be really helpful in like basically forcing yourself to slow down. Even if it's like short, even if it's 10 minutes. It's like 10 minutes at this certain amount of time in your training, you're going to stop and sit under a tree or you're going to stop and do this can be really helpful. Um And yeah, like that's it doesn't need to be a 3-hour nature walk or an overnight camping trip. It can be like a quick walk outside during your lunch break or sitting by a window with natural light, like you said, or keeping plants at your desk can be a good way to like incorporate it. Even giving yourself a task to do while you're in nature, like stopping to take a photo or have a checklist of photos that you want to have a picture of, or journaling while you're in nature or drawing a picture, um, collecting something for somebody. Those can be like if you kind of turn it into like a game, I don't know, especially for the type A people who sort of like are like me that, have to finish something or have sort of like a reason behind why they're doing what they're doing. Um, yeah, get creative with it. Figure out something to do with it. There's like going back to I feel like there's so many cool ways to incorporate rec into this too. And as a recreation therapist, this is where I see the most connection, but like um, even incorporating, like, your creative side with it, finding a rock that you want to paint something on, or, like, finding things in nature that you can make a craft out of can be a cool way to, like, force yourself to kind of slow down and look for those things. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And especially I love the idea of like finding something for someone because it's also like I think sometimes we think about like engaging in nature as being like such a solo and like I don't want to say isolated because I don't think we necessarily feel that way when we're out there, but like most people probably would go and do this on their own, but and it can feel a little bit lonely. But if you're out there like intentionally looking for something that's gonna like remind you of, I don't know, your grandma, like maybe grandma's birthday's coming up and you're like, oh, I want to make her a card or paint her a rock or whatever. It's like go out there and find something and be like, "Grandma, this made me think of you," you know? It's like little
Yes.
kids, again, coming back to play, but, like, little kids will, like, bring a dandelion in from outside and be like, "Here, mom, I brought this in for you," and it's like, do it. Like, if it makes you think of somebody, then just do it, no shame.
Yeah, I when I was in high school, I remember one of my friends, she lived like I think 3 hours-ish or a couple hours away from me anyways, and she mailed me a card one time, and in the card there was like a singular blade of grass taped to the card, and it was like, "Dear Alyssa, I found this blade of grass in my yard for you. Love you." Like that was it. And at the time I thought it was hilarious, but like it like something so little like that just made me giggle, and she like obviously went outside and picked up the blade of grass and then went through all the effort of taping it into the card and then taking it to the post office and mailing it. That made me feel good,
Yeah.
even though the intention, I think, was to make me laugh. It wasn't necessarily as, like, a heartfelt thing, but it felt like it.
Yeah, well, and it's like, regardless, there was a positive emotion that came along with it, and, like, let's be honest, if somebody showed up with anything and was like, "Here, I thought of you when I saw this," or "Here, I got this for you." Like, would we be sad about it? Like, even if we're like, "That's weird." There's still like there's still some positivity, I think, of like somebody thought of me and then being the person on the giving side. Like, I mean, there's a ton of research around that too. We're like totally on a different topic, but like there's a lot of research about the benefits of like giving things. So you can use nature as like a source for that. And even if it's not a physical item out of nature, maybe if you're somebody that's like likes to draw or paint, like maybe you're taking a photo or like yeah, photography too, but like taking a picture or something or and sending it to somebody or like drawing or painting a scene that you saw that, made you happy. So you would hope it would also make somebody else happy. Like there's so many different ways to connect with this that isn't just inspecting a tree, like I said earlier.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I do, and I don't know, I guess like it's a mindfulness technique, and I find it really helpful, is I call it rainbow walks. So I'll go out specifically in nature because it's way too easy if you're walking in town. Um, I think. But you go out in nature and you have to go through the colors of the rainbow in order and like find something that you see that color. So you start at red, until you find something red, you're looking for red, and then you find something orange, and you find something yellow, and it's actually really it's hard, but it, like, makes you look super close, and you see stuff that you would never see, because if you think about, like, just your I don't know, I'm just picturing, like, a forest near my house, it's like, God, I can't even picture anything out there that would be red, especially right now, it's winter and everything's white and brown, Green is really easy, but so it's like, but you go out there and within like 2 or 3 minutes, you find something red and it's like, "Oh, wow, I've never even noticed that before." So it's kind of cool way to get mindful and engaged too.
Yeah, that's a great invitation. I feel like that would be a wonderful invitation for a guide to consider. I think, like, I'll have to send you or write a blog post or send you, like, a list of invitations that I kind of have access to because there's so many, like, really creative ones. Even, like, focusing on what's in motion is another invitation that we typically do as a guide when we're doing a walk. So it's really easy when you're in nature to be like, the trees are in motion because 'cause they're swaying and there's a breeze or a bird flew overhead. But when you actually stop and slow down, like, when I did my training, the last part of the training was a 4-day retreat in Mission, BC, which was beautiful. It was at the beginning of May, and when you slowed down, you could see the fiddlehead ferns, like, quivering because they were unfolding. And you would
Oh.
never see that if you were just walking by, but when you stopped and, like, actually sat with them, you could watch them just, like, vibrate. There's, like, ever so slightly. It was the most beautiful thing that I don't know if I would ever have, like, actually noticed it until I sat there, and it was like, imagine when you're watching, um, like, what is that show? Like, Animal
Planet
Planet,
Earth or
but the
whatever.
Earth one.
Planet
Yes,
Earth,
and
yeah.
it's like the, like, time lapse of it turning into spring, like, that's exactly what it was like, but in, like, ultra slow motion, and it was really cool, so even focusing on, like, those little, I don't know, little prompts to yourself, like the rainbow walks of, like, noticing what's in motion, but not the most basic version of it, like, pushing yourself to, like, look a little bit harder, because I think that that's what you're doing by going out into the forest versus walking in town. It's really easy to notice those things in town, so how are you pushing yourself to, like, take a little bit of extra time with it?
And I mean, doing it in town is like you can still do it. It does make you more aware of your environment too. So it's a good mindfulness exercise. But yeah, getting into the forest. Oh, that's like what a powerful experience. I can't even imagine like being able to see that in like live, not on TV. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty cool.
It was beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love those time lapse videos. Those are just like the coolest.
Yep, definitely.
Amazing. Okay, so tell us a little bit then about Come Hug a Tree. You kind of touched on it at the beginning, but give us it all.
Yeah. So, I'll give you the background of the name first because I think that this is a funny story. But when I first did my training, I was raised on a farm that was my dad was always a firm believer in like taking care of the land, and the land deserves for us to respect it. And so that was always something that we were kind of like raised to know. Um, and when I told him that I was doing this training, he kept calling me a tree hugger. And at first, I was like really kind of offended by it. Like, I'm like, that's like, kind of rude. But then there was a point where I'm like, "Actually, he's kind of right," and, like, so then I leaned into it, and so that's where the name came from, but basically, Come Hug a Tree is a platform that I started, in order to advocate for forest therapy and recreation therapy as holistic health practices. I'm also a Reiki practitioner, so that was kind of just a way it was just like a general space for me to be able to share about these things. So it's a website. I have my link tree on my website that has, like, my Instagram and Facebook accounts and whatnot, but, on my website, I have a blog, which is my own personal leisure. I really enjoy writing, so that's a way for me to kind of, like, get my words out there, and connect with kind of those topics that I think about on a day-to-day life. Um so yeah, I have my blog on there. I have a little bit of information about forest therapy, recreation therapy, and Reiki, and sort of the research behind it, which I think is really helpful because you hear about these things, but it's hard to decipher what is real and what is not. And having some examples of research can be a really good way to sort of like lean into it and understand why this might be helpful to you or how it might be helpful to you. So yeah, that's Come Hug a Tree. Um, I do I'm currently working as a recreation therapist, so, private practice or, like, I don't know, one-to-one recreation therapy isn't something that I'm offering right now, although it's something that I would like to do in the future. I think it's really cool that you've incorporated that into a private practice, but I do offer, virtual and in-person forest therapy walks that can be booked um, through my website.
That's awesome. And great to know that you do virtual too, because there's lots of practitioners out there, but sometimes, especially when you're like, for example, find somebody on a podcast and you're like, I really like that person and I want them to do it, but not everybody lives in Provost. So
Exactly.
we can bring you in virtually, which is really, really awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Is there any kind of like last thoughts or last words that you want to share with the team here before we wrap this all up?
I think the biggest thing is that I hope that this sort of sparked some ideas on maybe ways that you can incorporate nature into your everyday life. I 100% acknowledge that it can be something that's really tricky for a lot of people. It's tricky for myself to kind of set aside time to spend in nature, but um, I just hope that this was like, I don't know, kind of a way for you to think about some creative ways that you can incorporate it in order for it to work for you. It's not it's not always going to work for everybody, but I think yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. I'm always down to chat about this stuff also, so feel free to reach out to my email or any form of social media because I really love to visit about this topic specifically. So
Yeah, and it shows like you're so excited about it and passionate. So, yes, I will definitely drop the all of that information, the website, the blog, your contact details, all down in the show notes. So feel free to connect with Elyssa in any way and chat away about forest, the nature, all the good stuff. So, thank you so much for coming on today, Elyssa. That was a great chat, and go get outside, you guys, and or at the very least, engage with some sort of plant that you have in your house, or, and really enjoy it. Thanks for listening in, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast. I hope that today's episode has got you thinking and has inspired you to take action towards improving your mental health. If you're looking for more tools and insights on boosting mental health and sport performance, join me in my Instagram community at Ignite Health Coaching. Be sure to drop me a DM to say hi and let me know what your biggest takeaways have been so far. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get notified every time I drop a new episode. Sending you all the strength and energy that you need to crush your training, racing, and life.